Welcome once again to Ragnar Reads. This is your host, Ragnar Ulfson. And today we have The People of the Black Circle by Robert E. Howard, a Conan the Barbarian story. And so, let us begin. 1. Death strikes a king. The king of Vendahia was dying. Through the hot, stifling night, the temple gongs boomed and the conches roared. Their clamor was a faint echo in the gold-domed chamber where Bunda Chand struggled on the velvet-cushioned dais. Beads of sweat glistened on his dark skin. His fingers twisted the gold-worked fabric beneath him. He was young, no spear had touched him, no poison lurked in his wine, but his veins stood out like blue cords on his temples, and his eyes dilated with the nearness of death. Trembling slave girls knelt at the foot of the dais, and leaning down to him, watching him with passionate intensity, was his sister, the Devi Yasmina. With her was the Wazam, a noble grown old in the royal court. She threw up her head in a gusty gesture of wrath and despair as the thunder of the distant drums reached her ears. "The priests and their clamor," she exclaimed. "They are no wiser than the leeches who are helpless. Nay, he dies and none can say why. He is dying now, and I stand here helpless, who would burn the whole city and spill the blood of thousands to save him." "Not a man of Ayodhya would die in his place, if it might be, Devi," answered the Wazam. "This poison—" "I tell you it is not poison," she cried. "Since his birth he has been guarded so closely that the cleverest poisoners of the East could not reach him. 5 skulls bleaching the Tower of the Kites can testify to attempts which were made, and which failed. As you well know, there are 10 men and 10 women whose sole duty is to taste his food and wine, and 50 armed warriors guard his chamber as they guard it now. No, it is not poison, it is sorcery, black, ghastly magic." She ceased as the king spoke. His livid lips did not move, and there was no recognition in his glassy eyes, but his voice rose in an eerie call, indistinct and far away, as if called to her from beyond some vast, wind-blown gulfs. "Yasmina, Yasmina, my sister, where are you? I cannot find you. All is darkness and the roaring of great winds." "Brother," cried Yasmina, catching his limped hand in a convulsive grasp, "I am here. Do you not know me?" Her voice died at the utter vacancy of his face. A low, confused moan waned from his mouth. The slave girls at the foot of the dais whimpered with fear, and Yasmina beat her breast in anguish. In another part of the city a man stood in a latticed balcony overlooking a long street in which torches tossed luridly, smokily revealing upturned dark faces and the whites of gleaming eyes. A long-drawn wailing rose from the multitude. The man shrugged his broad shoulders and turned back into the arboresque chamber. He was a tall man, compactly built and richly clad. "The king is not yet dead, but the dirge is sounded," he said to another man who sat cross-legged on a mat in a corner. This man was clad in a brown camel hair robe and sandals, and a green turban was on his head. His expression was tranquil, his gaze impersonal. "The people know he will never see another dawn," this man answered. The first speaker favored him with a long, searching stare. "What I cannot understand," he said, "is why I have had to wait so long for your masters to strike. If they have slain the king now, why could they not have slain him months ago?" "Even the arts you call sorcery are governed by cosmic laws," answered the man in the green turban. "The stars direct these actions, as in other affairs. Not even my masters can alter the stars. Not until the heavens were in the proper order could they perform this necromancy." With a long, stained fingernail, he mapped the constellations on the marble-tiled floor. The slant of the moon presaged evil for the king of Vendahia. The stars are in turmoil, the serpent in the house of the elephant. During such juxtaposition, the invisible guardians are removed from the spirit of Bunda Chand. A path is opened into the unseen realms, and once a point of contact was established, mighty powers were put in play along that path. "Point of contact?" inquired the other. "Do you mean that lock of Bunda Chad's hair?" "Yes, all discarded portions of the human body still remain part of it, attached to it by intangible connections. The priests of Asura have a dim inkling of this truth, and so all nail trimmings, hair, and other waste products of the persons of the royal family are carefully reduced to ashes and the ashes hidden. But at the urgent entreaty of the princess of Kailasa, who loved Bunda Chand vainly, he gave her a lock of his long black hair as a token of remembrance. When my masters decided upon his doom, the lock, in its golden jewel-encrusted case, was stolen from under her pillow while she slept, and another substituted, so like the first that she never knew the difference. Then the genuine lock traveled by camel caravan up the long, long road to Peshkari, thence up to the Zabar Pass, where it reached the hands of those for whom it was intended. "Only a lock of hair," murmured the nobleman, "by which a soul is drawn from its body in across gulfs of echoing space," returned the man on the mat. The nobleman studied him curiously. "I do not know if you are a man or a demon, Kemsa," he said at last. "Few of us are what we seem. I, whom the Kasarates know as Karamsa, a prince from Iranistan, am no greater a masquerader than most men. They are all traitors in one way or another, and half of them know not whom they serve. There at least I have no doubts, for I serve King Yezdegerd of Tiran. And I the black seers of Yimsha, said Kemsa, and my masters are greater than yours, for they have accomplished by their arts what Yezdegerd could not with 100,000 swords." Outside, the moan of the tortured thousands shuddered up to the stars which crusted the sweating Vendian night, and the conches bellowed like oxens in pain. In the gardens of the palace the torches glinted on polished helmets and curved swords and gold-chased corselets. All the noble-born fighting men of the Adoya were gathered in the great palace or about it, and at each broad-arched gate and door 50 archers stood on guard with bows in their hands. But death stalked through the royal palace, and none could stay its ghostly tread. On the dais under the golden dome the king cried out again, racked by awful paroxysms. Again his voice came faintly and far away, and again the Devi bent to him, trembling with a fear that was darker than the terror of death. "Yasmina!" Again that far, weirdly dreaming cry from realms immeasurable. "Aid me, I am far from my mortal house. Wizards have drawn my soul through the wind-blown darkness. They seek to snap the silver cord that binds me to my dying body. They cluster around me. Their hands are taloned. Their eyes are red like flame burning in darkness. Aye, save me, sister. Their fingers sear me like fire. They would slay my body and damn my soul. What is this they bring before me? Aye!" At the terror in his hopeless cry, Yasmina screamed uncontrollably and threw herself bodily upon him in the abandon of her anguish. He was torn by a terrible convulsion. Foam flew from his contorted lips, and his writhing fingers left their marks on the girl's shoulders. But the glassy blankness passed from his eyes like smoke blown from a fire, and he looked up at his sister with recognition. "Brother," she sobbed, "brother!" "Swift," he gasped, and his weakening voice was rational. "I know now what brings me to the pyre. I have been on a far journey, and I understand. I have been ensorcered by the wizards of the Himalayans. They drew my soul out of my body and far away into a stone room. There they strove to break the silver cord of life, and thrust my soul into the body of a foul night weird their sorcery summoned up from hell. Ah, I feel their pull upon me now. Your cry and the grip of your fingers brought me back, but I am going fast. My soul clings to my body, but its hold weakens. Quick, kill me before they can trap my soul forever." "I cannot," she wailed, smiting her naked breasts. "Swiftly, I command you." There was the old imperious note in his failing whisper. "You have never disobeyed me. Obey my last command. Send my soul clean to Asura. Haste, lest you damn me to spend eternity as a filthy gaunt of darkness. Strike, I command you, strike!" Sobbing wildly, Yasmina plucked a jeweled dagger from her girdle and plunged it to the hilt in his breast. He stiffened and then went limp, a grim smile curving his dead lips. Yasmina hurled herself face down on the rush-covered floor, beating the reeds with her clenched hands. Outside, the gongs and conches brayed and thundered, and the priests gashed themselves with copper knives. Chapter 2. A Barbarian from the Hills. Chundershan, governor of Peshkarai, laid down his golden pen and carefully scanned that which he had written on parchment that bore his official seal. He had ruled Peshkarai so long only because he weighted his every word, spoken or written. Danger breeds caution, and only a wary man lives long in that wild country where the hot Vendayan plains meet the crag of the Himalayans. An hour's ride westward or northward, and one crossed the border and was among the hills where men lived by the law of the knife. The governor was alone in his chamber, seated in his ornately carven table of inlaid ebony. Through the wide window, open for the coolness, he could see a square of the blue Himalayan night, dotted with great white stars. An adjacent parapet was a shadow line, and further crenelles and embrasures were barely hinted at in the dim starlight. The governor's fortress was strong and situated outside the walls of the city it guarded. The breeze that stirred the tapestries on the wall brought faint noises from the streets of Peshkarai, occasional snatches of wailing song or the thrum of a cithern. The governor read what he had written, slowly, with his open hand shading his eyes from the bronze butter lamp, his lips moving. Absently as he read, he heard the drum of horses' hooves outside the Barbarican, and the sharp staccato of the guard's challenge. He did not heed, intent upon his letter. It was addressed to the Wazam of Vendeha at the royal court of Adoya, and it stated, after the customary salutations, "Let it be known to your excellency that I have faithfully carried out your excellency's instructions. The 7 tribesmen are well guarded in their prison, and I have repeatedly sent word into the hills that their chief come in person to bargain for their release. But he has made no move, except to send word that unless they are freed, he will burn Peshkarai and cover his saddle with my hide, begging your excellency's indulgence. This he is quite capable of attempting, and I have tripled the number of the lance guards. The man is not a native of Gulistan. I cannot with certainty predict his next move, but since it is the wish of the Devi..." He was out of his ivory chair and on his feet facing the arched door all in one instant. He snatched at the curved sword lying in its ornate scabbard on the table, then checked the movement. It was a woman who had entered unannounced, a woman whose gossamer robes did not conceal the rich garments beneath them any more than they concealed the suppleness and beauty of her tall, slender figure. A filmy veil fell below her breasts, supported by a flowing headdress bound about with triple gold braid and adorned with a golden crescent. Her dark eyes regarded the astonished governor over the veil, and then with an imperious gesture of her white hand she uncovered her face. "Devi!" The governor dropped to his knees before her, surprise and confusion somewhat spoiling the stateliness of his obeisance. With a gesture she motioned him to rise, and he hastened to lead her to the ivory chair, all while bowing level with his girdle. But his first words were of reproof. "Your Majesty, this was most unwise. The border is unsettled. Raids from the hills are incessant. You came with a large attendance?" "An ample retinue followed me to Peshkarai," she answered. "I lodged my people there and came on to the fort with my maid, Gitra." Chundershan groaned in horror. "Devi, you do not understand the peril. An hour's ride from this spot, the hills swarm with barbarians who make a profession of murder and rapine. Women have been stolen and men stabbed between the fort and the city. Peshkarai is not like your southern provinces." "But I am here, and unharmed," she interrupted with a trace of impatience. "I showed my signet ring to the guard at the gate and to the one outside your door, and they admitted me unannounced, not knowing me, but supposing me to be a secret courier from Adoya. Let us not waste time. You have received no word from the chief of the barbarians?" "None save threats and curses, Devi. He is wary and suspicious. He deems it a trap, and perhaps he is not to be blamed. The Kshatriyas have not always kept their promises to the hill people." "He must be brought to terms," broke in Yasmina, the knuckles on her clenched hands showing white. "I do not understand," the governor shook his head. "When I chanced to capture these 7 hillmen, I reported their capture to the Wazam, as is the custom, and then, before I could hang them, there came an order to hold them and communicate with their chief. This I did, but the man holds aloof, as I have said. These men are of the tribe of Afgulis, but he is a foreigner from the west, and he is called Conan. I have threatened to hang them tomorrow at dawn if he does not come." "Good," exclaimed the Devi. "You have done well, and I will tell you why I have given these orders. My brother—" She faltered, choking, and the governor bowed his head, with the customary gesture of respect for a departed sovereign. "The king of Vendeha was destroyed by magic," she said at last. "I have devoted my life to the destruction of his murderers. As he died, he gave me a clue, and I have followed it. I have read the Book of Skelos and talked with nameless hermits in the caves below Jelai. I learned how and by whom he was destroyed. His enemies were the Black Seers of Mount Yishma." "Asura," whispered Chundershan, paling. Her eyes knifed through him. "Do you fear them?" "Who does not, your majesty?" he replied. "They are black devils, haunting the uninhabited hills beyond the Zybar, but the sages say that they seldom interfere in the lives of mortal men. Why they slew my brother I do not know, she answered, but I have sworn on the altar of Asura to destroy them, and I need the aid of a man beyond the border. A Kshatriya army, unaided, would never reach Yishma. Aye, muttered Chandrashun. You speak the truth here. It would be a fight every step of the way, with hairy hillmen hurling down boulders from every height and rushing us with their long knives in every valley. The Tyrrhenians fought their way through the Himlians once, but how many returned to Kurishan? Few of those who escaped the swords of the Kshatriyas. Again, the king, your brother, defeated their host on the Jumda River. Ever saw Sukumundran again. And so I must control men across the border, she said, men who know the way to Mount Yishma. But the tribes fear the Black Seers and shun the unholy mountain, broke in the governor. Does this chief, Conan, fear them? Well, as to that, muttered the governor, I doubt there is anything that devil fears. So I have been told. Therefore he is the man I must deal with. He wishes the release of his 7 men. Very well. The ransom shall be the heads of the Black Seers. Her voice thrummed with hate as she uttered the last words, and her hands clenched at her sides. She looked an image of incarnate passion as she stood there with her head thrown high and her bosom heaving. Again the governor knelt, for part of his wisdom was the knowledge that a woman in such an emotional tempest is as perilous as a blind cobra to any about her. It shall be as you wish, your majesty. Then, as she presented a calmer aspect, he rose and ventured to drop a word of warning. I cannot predict what the chief Conan's actions will be. The tribesmen are always turbulent, and I have reason to believe that emissaries from the Tyrrhenians are stirring them up to raid our borders. As your majesty knows, the Tyrrhenians have established themselves in Securendum and other northern cities, though the hill tribes remain unconquered. King Yezdegerd has long looked southward with greedy lust, and perhaps is seeking to gain by treachery what he could not win by force of arms. I have thought that Conan might well be one of his spies. We shall see, she answered. If he loves his followers, he will be at the gates at dawn, to parley. I shall spend the night in the fortress. I came in disguise to Peshkari, and lodged my retinue in an inn instead of the palace. Besides my people, only yourself knows of my presence here. I shall escort you to your quarters, your majesty, said the governor, and as they emerged from the doorway, he beckoned the warrior on guard there, and the man fell in behind them, spear held at salute. The maid waited, veiled like her mistress, outside the door, and the group traversed a wide, winding corridor, lighted by smoky torches, and reached the quarters reserved for visiting notables, generals and viceroys mostly. None of the royal family had ever honored the fortress before. Chandrashun had a perturbed feeling that the suite was not suitable to such an exalted personage as the Devi, and though she sought to make him feel at ease in her presence, he was glad when she dismissed him and he bowed himself out. All the menials of the fort had been summoned to serve his royal guest, though he did not divulge her identity, and he stationed a squad of spearmen before her door, among them the warrior who had guarded his own chamber. In his preoccupation, he forgot to replace the man. The governor had not been gone long from her when Yasmina suddenly remembered something else with which she had wished to discuss with him, but had forgotten until that moment. It concerned the past actions of one Kerem Shah, a nobleman from Iranistan, who had dwelt for a while in Perishkai before coming onto the court of the Adoya. A vague suspicion concerning the man had been stirred by a glimpse of him in Perishkai that night. She wondered if he had followed her from Adoya. Being a truly remarkable Devi, she did not summon the governor to her again, but hurried out of the corridor alone and hastened towards his chamber. Chandrashun, entering his chamber, closed the door and went to his table. There he took the letter he had been writing and tore it to bits. Scarcely had he finished when he heard something drop softly onto the parapet adjacent to the window. He looked up to see a figure loom briefly against the stars, and then a man dropped lightly into the room. The light glinted on a long sheen of steel in his hand. "Shh," he warned. "Don't make a noise, or I'll send the devil a henchman." The governor checked his motion towards the sword on the table. He was within reach of the yard-long Zybar knife that glittered in the intruder's fist, and he knew the desperate quickness of a hillman. The invader was a tall man, at once strong and supple. He was dressed like a hillman, but his dark features and blazing blue eyes did not match his garb. Chandrashun had never seen a man like him. He was not an Easterner, but some barbarian from the west. but his aspect was as untamed and formidable as any of the hairy tribesmen who hunt the hills of Gulistan. "You come like a thief in the night," commented the governor, recovering some of his composure, although he remembered that there was no guard within call. Still, the hillman could not know that. "I climbed a bastion," snarled the intruder. "A guard thrust his head over the battlement in time for me to rap it with my knife hilt." "You are Conan? Who else? You sent word into the hills that you wished for me to come and parley with you. Well, by Crom, I've come. Keep away from that table or I'll gut you." "I merely wish to seat myself," answered the governor, carefully sinking into the ivory chair, which he wheeled away from the table. Conan moved restlessly before him, glancing suspiciously at the door, thumbing the razor edge of his 3-foot knife. He did not walk like an Algoufi, and was bluntly direct where the East is subtle. "You have 7 of my men," he said abruptly. "You refused the ransom I offered. What the devil do you want?" "Let us discuss terms," answered Chunder Shan cautiously. "Terms?" There was a timbre of dangerous anger in his voice. "What do you mean? Haven't I offered you gold?" Chunder Shan laughed. "Gold? There is more gold in Peshkarai than you ever saw." "You are a liar," retorted Conan. "I've seen the sook of the goldsmiths in Khorasan." "Well, more than an Afghuli ever saw," amended Chunder Shan. "And it is but a drop of all the treasure of Vendeha. Why should we desire gold? It would be more to our advantage to hang these 7 thieves." Conan ripped out a sulphurous oath, and the long blade quivered in his grip as the muscles rose in ridges on his brown arm. "I'll split your head like a ripe melon." A wild blue flame flickered in the hillman's eyes, but Chunder Shan shrugged his shoulders, though keeping an eye on the keen steel. "You can kill me easily, and probably escape over the wall afterward, but that would not save the 7 tribesmen. My men would surely hang them, and these men are headmen among the Afghulis." "I know it," snarled Conan. "The tribe is baying like wolves at my heels because I have not procured the release. Tell me in plain words what you want, because by Crom, if there's no other way, I'll raise a horde and lead it to the very gates of Peshkarai." Looking at the man as he stood squarely, knife in fist and eyes glaring, Chunder Shan did not doubt that he was capable of it. The governor did not believe any hill horde could take Peshkarai, but he did not wish a devastated countryside. "There's a mission you must perform," he said, choosing his words with as much care as if they had been razors. "There—" Conan had sprung back, wheeling to face the door at the same instant, lips a-snarl. His barbarian ears had caught the quick tread of soft slippers outside the door. The next instant, the door was thrown open and a slim, silk-robed form entered hastily, pulling the door shut, then stopping short at the sight of the hillman. Chunder Shan sprang up, his heart jumping into his mouth. "Devi!" he cried involuntarily, losing his head momentarily in his fright. "Devi!" It was like an explosive echo from the hillman's lips. Chunder Shan saw recognition and intent flame up in those fierce blue eyes. The governor shouted desperately and caught at his sword, but the hillman moved with the devastating speed of a hurricane. He sprang, knocked the governor sprawling with a savage blow of his knife hilt, swept up the astounded Devi in one brawny arm, and leapt for the window. Chunder Shan, struggling frantically to his feet, saw the man poise an instant on the sill in a flutter of silken skirts and white limbs that was his royal captive, and heard his fierce exultant snarl, "Now dare to hang my men!" And then Conan leapt to the parapet and was gone. A wild scream floated back to the governor's ears. "Guard! Guard!" screamed the governor, struggling up and running drunkenly to the door. He tore it open and reeled into the hall. His shouts re-echoed along the corridors, and warriors came running, gaping to see the governor holding his broken head from which the blood streamed. "Turn out the lancers!" he roared. "There has been an abduction!" Even in his frenzy, he had enough sense to withhold the full truth. He stopped short as he heard a sudden drum of hoofs outside, a frantic scream, and a wild yell of barbaric exultation. Followed by the bewildered guardsmen, the governor raced for the stair. In the courtyard of the fort, a force of lancers stood by saddled steeds, ready to ride at an instant's notice. Chunder Shan led his squadron flying after the fugitive, though his head swam so he had to hold with both hands to the saddle. He did not divulge the identity of the victim, but said merely that the noblewoman who had borne the royal signet ring had been carried away by the chief of the Afghulis. The abductor was out of sight and hearing, but they knew the path he would strike, the road that runs straight to the mouth of the Zybar. There was no moon. Peasants' huts rose dimly in the starlight. Behind them fell away the grim bastion of the fort and the towers of Peshkarai. Ahead of them loomed the black walls of the Himlians. Chapter 3. Kemsa uses magic. In the confusion that reigned in the fortress while the guard was being turned out, no one noticed that the girl who had accompanied the Devi slipped out the great arched gate and vanished in the darkness. She ran straight for the city, her garments tucked high. She did not follow the open road, but cut straight through fields and over slopes, avoiding fences and leaping irrigation ditches as surely as if it were broad daylight, and as easily as if she were a trained masculine runner. The hoof drum of the guardsmen had faded away up the hill before she reached the city wall. She did not go to the great gate, beneath whose arch men leaned on spears and craned their necks into the darkness, discussing the unwanted activity about the fortress. She skirted the wall until she reached a certain point where the spire of the tower was visible above the battlements. Then she placed her hands to her mouth and voiced a low, weird call that carried strangely. Almost instantly, a head appeared at an embrasure and a rope came wriggling down the wall. She seized it, planted a foot in the loop at the end, and waved her arm. Then quickly and smoothly she was drawn up the sheer stone curtain. An instant later she scrambled over the merlons and stood on a flat roof which covered a house that was built against the wall. There was an open trap there, and a man in a camel hair robe who silently coiled the rope, not showing in any way the strain of hauling a full-grown woman up a 40-foot wall. "Where is Kerem Shah?" she gasped, panting after her long run. "Asleep in the house below. You have news?" "Conan has stolen the Devi out of the fortress and carried her away into the hills." She blurted out her news in a rush, the words stumbling over one another. Kemsa showed no emotion, but merely nodded his turbaned head. "Kerem will be glad to hear that." "Wait!" The girl threw her supple arms around his neck. She was panting hard, but not only from exertion. Her eyes blazed like black jewels in the starlight. Her upturned face was close to Kemsa's, but though he submitted to her embrace, he did not return it. "Do not tell the Hyrcanian," she panted. "Let us use this knowledge ourselves. The governor has gone into the hills with his riders, but he might as well chase a ghost. He has not told anyone that it was the Devi who was kidnapped. None in Peshkarai or the fort knows it except us." "But what good does it do us?" the man expostulated. "My masters sent me with Kerem Shah to aid him in every way." "Aid yourself," she cried fiercely. "Shake off your yoke." "You mean disobey my masters?" he gasped, and she felt his whole body turn cold under her arms. "Aye," she shook him in the fury of her emotion. "You too are a magician. Why will you be a slave, using your powers only to elevate others? Use your arts for yourself." "That is forbidden." He was shaking as if with an ague. "I am not one of the Black Circle. Only by the command of the masters do I dare use the knowledge they have taught me." "But you can use it," she argued passionately. "Do as I beg you. Of course Conan has taken the Devi to hold as hostage against the 7 tribesmen in the governor's prison. Destroy them, so Chundershan cannot use them to buy back the Devi. Let us go into the mountains and take her from the Afghulis. They cannot stand against your sorcery with their knives. The treasure of the Vendehan kings will be ours as ransom, and then when we have it in our hands, we can trick them and sell her to the king of Turan. We shall have wealth beyond our maddest dreams. With it we can buy warriors. We can take Korbul, oust the Turians from the hills, and send our hosts southwards. Become king and queen of an empire." Kemsa too was panting, shaking like a leaf in her grasp. His face showed gray in the starlight, beaded with great drops of perspiration. "I love you," she cried fiercely, writhing her body against his, almost strangling him in her wild embrace, shaking him in her abandon. "I will make a king of you. For the love of you I betrayed my mistress. For love of me betray your masters. Why fear the Black Seers? By your love for me you have broken one of their laws already. Break the rest. You are as strong as they." A man of ice could not have withstood the searing heat of her passion and fury. With an articulate cry he crushed her to him, bending her backwards and showering gasping kisses on her eyes, face, and lips. "I'll do it." His voice was thick with laboring emotions. He staggered like a drunken man. The arts they have taught me shall work for me, not for my masters. We shall be rulers of the world. Of the world. Come then. Twisting lithely out of his embrace, she seized his hand and led him towards the trapdoor. First, we must make sure that the governor does not exchange those 7 Afghulis for the Devi. He moved like a man in a daze until they had descended the ladder, and she paused in the chamber below. Karam Shah lay on a couch motionless, an arm across his face, as though to shield his sleeping eyes from the soft light of a brass lamp. She plucked Kemsaw's arm and made a quick gesture across her own throat. Kemsaw lifted his hand, then his expression changed and he drew away. "I have eaten his salt," he muttered. "Besides, he cannot interfere with us." He led the girl through a door that opened on a winding stair. After their soft tread had faded into silence, the man on the couch sat up. Karam Shah wiped the sweat from his face. A knife thrust he did not dread, but he feared Kemsaw as a man fears a poisonous reptile. "People who plot on roofs should remember to lower their voices," he muttered. "But as Kemsaw has turned against his masters, and as he was my only contact between them, I can count on their aid no longer. From now on, I play the game in my own way." Rising to his feet, he went quickly to a table, drew pen and parchment from his girdle, and scribbled a few succinct lines. To Khorasa Khan, governor of Secunderam, the Sumerian Conan has carried the Devi Yasmina to the villages of the Afghulis. It is an opportunity to get the Devi into our hands, as the king has so long desired. Send 3,000 horsemen at once. I will meet them in the valley of Gurashah with native guides. And he signed it with a name that was not in the least like Karam Shah. Then from a golden cage he drew forth a carrier pigeon, to whose leg he made fast the parchment, rolled into a tiny cylinder and secured with gold wire. Then he went quickly to a casement and tossed the bird into the night. It wavered on fluttering wings, balanced, and was gone like a flitting shadow. Catching up helmet, sword, and cloak, Karam Shah hurried out of the chamber and down the winding stair. The prison quarters of Perishkai were separated from the rest of the city by a massive wall, in which was set a single iron-bound door under an arch. Over the arch burned a lurid red cresset, when beside the door squatted a warrior with spear and shield. This warrior, leaning on his spear and yawning from time to time, started suddenly to his feet. He had not thought he had dozed, but a man was standing before him, a man he had not heard approach. The man wore a camel hair robe and a green turban. In the flickering light of the cresset, his features were shadowy, but a pair of lampant eyes shone surprisingly in the lurid glow. "Who comes?" demanded the warrior, presenting his spear. "Who are you?" The stranger did not seem perturbed, though the spear point touched his bosom. His eyes held the warrior's with strange intensity. "What are you obliged to do?" he asked strangely. "To guard the gate," the warrior spoke thickly and mechanically. He stood rigid as a statue, his eyes slowly glazing. "You lie. You are obliged to obey me. You have looked into my eyes, and your soul is no longer your own. Open that door!" Stiffly, with the wooden features of an image, the guard wheeled about, drew a great key from his girdle, turned it in the massive lock, and swung open the door. Then he stood at attention, his unseeing stare straight ahead of him. A woman glided from the shadows and laid an eager hand on the mesmerist's arm. "Bid him to fetch us horses, Kemsaw," she whispered. "No need of that," answered the Rakshas. Lifting his voice slightly, he spoke to the guardsman. "I have no more use for you. Kill yourself." Like a man in a trance, the warrior thrust the butt of his spear against the base of the wall and placed the keen head against his body, just below the ribs. Then slowly, stolidly, he leaned against it with all his weight, so that it transfixed his body and came out between his shoulders. Sliding down the shaft, he lay still, the spear jutting above him its full length, like a horrible stalk growing out of his back. The girl stared down at him in morbid fascination, until Kemsaw took her arm and led her through the gate. Torches lighted a narrow space between the outer wall and a lower inner one, in which were arched doors at regular intervals. A warrior paced this enclosure, and when the gate opened, he came sauntering up, so secure in his knowledge of the prison's strength that he was not suspicious until Kemsaw and the girl emerged from the archway. Then it was too late. The Rakshas did not waste time in hypnotism, though his actions savored of magic to the girl. The guard lowered his spear threateningly, opening his mouth to shout an alarm that would bring spearmen swarming out of the guard rooms at either end of the alleyway. Kemsa flicked the spear aside with his left hand, as a man might flick a straw, and his right flashed out and back, seeming gently to caress the warrior's neck in passing, and the guard pitched on his face without a sound, his head lolling on a broken neck. Kemsa did not glance at him, but went straight to one of the arched doors and placed his open hand against the heavy bronze lock. With a rending shudder, the portal buckled inward. As the girl followed him through, she saw that the thick teak wood hung in splinters. The bronze bolts were bent and twisted from their sockets, and the great hinges broken and disjointed. 1,000-pound battering ram with 40 men to swing it could have shattered the barrier no more completely. Kemsa was drunk with freedom and the exercise of his power, glorying in his might and flinging his strength about as a young giant exercises his thews with unnecessary vigor and the exultant pride of his prowess. The broken door led them into a small courtyard lit by a cresset. Opposite the door was a wide grille of iron bars. A hairy hand was visible, gripping one of these bars, and in the darkness behind them glimmered the white of eyes. Kemsa stood silent for a space, gazing into the shadows from which those glimmering eyes gave back his stare with burning intensity. Then his hand went into his robe and came out again, and from his opening fingers a shimmering feather of sparkling dust sifted to the flags. Instantly a flare of green fire lighted the enclosure. In the brief glare, the forms of 7 men standing motionless behind the bars were limned with vivid detail. Tall, hairy men in ragged hillman garments. They did not speak, but their eyes blazed the fear of death, and their hairy fingers gripped the bars. The fire died out, but the glow remained, a quivering ball of limpid green that pulsed and shimmered on the flags before Kemsa's feet. The wide gaze of the tribesmen was fixed upon it. It wavered, elongated, it turned into a luminous green smoke spiraling upward. It twisted and writhed like a great shadowy serpent, then broadened and billowed out in shining folds and whirls. It grew to a cloud moving silently over the flags, straight towards the grill. The men watched its coming with dilated eyes. The bars quivered with the grip of their desperate fingers. Bearded lips parted but no sound came forth. The green cloud rolled on the bars and blotted them from sight, like a fog oozed through the grill and hid the men within. From the enveloping folds came a straggling gasp, as of a man with lunge suddenly into the surface of water. That was all. Kemsa touched the girl's arm, and she stood with parted lips and dilated eyes. Again, she turned away from him, back to the grill. Already the mist was thinning. That was chapters 1 through 3 of People of the Black Circle. I hope you enjoyed this. I'll have the next 3 chapters up shortly. Should be within the next day. And once again, like, subscribe, comment if you enjoyed that, and if you have a suggestion that you would like for me to read next. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day.